Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're talking about Infor's Configure Price Quote software.
So here's the agenda. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. This is the agenda for today's session. We're going to learn how to launch the CPQ software product from XA. We'll walk through a CPQ configuration session. We'll look at CPQ's 2D and 3D drawing capabilities. And we'll talk about the cloud-based CPQ, which is definitely considerably different from the on-premise version of CPQ. We'll talk about how a CPQ configuration is captured in XA and what XA does once CPQ has passed configuration data to XA. And then we'll talk about ISE's UIG application that extends the CPQ and XA integration. And of course, we want to have plenty of time to answer your questions. So I'm going to move on from there. Okay, let me get started here. All right. So these screens are here periodically throughout the presentation, and I'll try to remember to pause every time I hit one of these screens, so I'll have time to answer your questions. So I definitely want to respond to questions, and these screens will provide a timely way to do that. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about how you launch CPQ from XA. Oh, excuse me, I have a little bit of a heavy finger on the mouse key. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history of configurations in XA. I think it'll help set some precedent and also set the stage for CPQ. So those of you that have been around a while certainly understand XA's features and options. And this, of course, was a good way. I mean, it was for what it is, it's very powerful, and it does a lot. This was a way to for XA to provide the ability to specify and capture simple configuration choices. And you ended up with a 20-character, what was called an S number, and that S number, of course, is ubiquitous across XA and all the multitude of files, CO line item and MO, master, header, item revision, et cetera, et cetera. So that was features and options. You basically built this 20-character alphanumeric string that represented a collection of user responses for the options to each of the features. All right, coming along then was the knowledge-based configurator, KBC. And this was a green screen-based, rules-based configurator. So it was a big step forward from features and options. It was based on the green screen. It still exists, actually. I should use present tense. It was definitely rules-based, though, and so you set up rules and allowable values for all the items on your questionnaire, and then you could design how the questionnaire was presented to the user. And you can see a typical screen here. This was the KBC quick entry screen you're looking at, and apparently this was simulating drapes for a convention. So you have a company that makes custom drapery for special conventions. Apparently they print logos and things like that, and so you had all your choices that you could make, and that's what that's representing. So that was KBC on the green screen. Advanced Product Configurator, also called Chameleon or APC, was a Windows-based, not green screen-based, but Windows-based, as you can see from the sample screenshot. It was still rules-based. You still set up configuration rules, and it guided you through a customization dialog, just like KBC did. So this was, I remember this being available at release 6 when I was at Mapix Inc. And then, of course, it continued on from there. Probably reached its peak of popularity in the release 7 days. And now we have CPQ. Speaking of which, so you now have Infor Configure Price Quote, or CPQ, and it is web-based. So you remember KBC was green screen-based, Chameleon or APC was Windows-based. So CPQ is web-based and rules-based, of course. And it's a rules-based configurator that, again, guides users through a customization dialog. And if you want it to, it can be very image-based as well, as this sample shows you for configuring a table. You have some radio buttons that you're filling in, and you also have, as far as the color, you have actually little samples, kind of like, going to the store to pick out wallpaper or paint or carpeting. They always have these little books full of samples. So that's what you're seeing there. So this is your first screenshot of CPQ if you've never seen it before. So this is an actual configuration session screen capture. All right, what does it take to run CPQ or to integrate CPQ and XA? So XA has to be at release 9, and I literally mean release 9, not 9.1 or 9.2. Although you'll see here in a second, you have to have PTF 2390, which I think of as the PTF that made XA 9.1. So we have a expert on our staff who does a lot of XA upgrades. She would definitely know which PTF was which. But anyway, so PTF 2390, and then if you were just at 2390, there was a special PTF to apply. The next two bullets have the build levels for the client, for the environment, and both link manager. You definitely need to use CSM and EPDM. And so if there's anything that's a little bit of a stumbling block in this list, it would be for customers that are not yet EPDM, that are still running PDM. So I run into places where we do demos and stuff, and we mention you need EPDM for CPQ, and they're not using EPDM currently. So that's probably, of everything on this list, would be the one potential stumbling block. You definitely need one of the XA graphical user interfaces, either NetLink or PowerLink. SystemLink definitely needs to be available and running. And then CPQ, you need to be 7.5 or later, and you need the CPQ System I toolkit. But take heart and be encouraged. That list may look intimidating, especially if you're not like an IT type person, but those prerequisites are all 10 years old. Okay, so that PTF 2390, according to what I found on Conciergerie there, it was released back on March 9th, 2012. So that's over 10 years old. So in my little image there is not too subtle, ancient ruins, ancient PTFs. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so so if you're at anywhere near a current release of 9.1, certainly if you're on 9.2 of any flavor, and 10, you're definitely all set. Here's a slide of the integration, and one reason I like this slide is it does remind me that CPQ used to be called PCM. It actually originally was called the by design configurator. And of course, the by was BUI, by design, a little bit of a pun there. And then it rebranded to PCM, and now it's CPQ. And this is something, I put this slide in, it's more for future reference. It does a good job, though, if you kind of study it, of showing that CPQ is an SQL database. Of course, XA, IBM DB2 database, how they talk, there's an unattached job involved, and things like that. So this is an overview, and then if you study CPQ more, this slide will make more and more sense to you. Okay, so XA knows how to invoke CPQ in the product configurator entry in the applications business object. That's usually on the environment tab. You have to give the service URL. I kind of marked out the host machine name and domain name for privacy purposes, but you actually establish the URL that XA will use to launch CPQ. So XA knows exactly how to invoke CPQ, and CPQ, a brand new window will pop up. If you're running NetLink inside of System I Workspace, especially inside of Infor OS, then the XA tab and the CPQ tab actually appear next to each other. Okay, so what does it take for an item to be configurable, to be recognized by CPQ as a configurable item? So the item revision record needs to be set up to require configuration. You can see in my screen capture here, that's a Boolean, either requires configuration or not. So set it up to requires configuration. And then the configurator type has to be the product configuration management, that PCM, the old branding for CPQ version 7+. If you have both of those, and provided you have a CPQ rule set with the same name as your item, then CPQ will launch a configuration session for that item. Okay, so what you need to do, though, not just any CO line item or quote line item, template or card will allow the launching. You need to have either a template or a card that contains this special icon. And I kind of have like an exploded view there. Over on the right has 5 little yellow squares and a red square, and that is your CPQ launcher icon, and it's always attached to the configuration ID attribute. And that's a special icon, has special meaning. It knows to launch CPQ using the URL that we talked about on the previous slide. So as long as all that's in play, you have a configurable item, the item revision set up to be configurable, you have a rule set with that name, and you launch CPQ using this special icon, and you have that configured item in the item, then great, CPQ launches. Any questions on any of that? That's definitely our first building block. How does XA launch CPQ? So Sherry, do you see any questions from any of our viewers?
I am not seeing any questions.
Okay, so now you've launched CPQ. What does it look like? So here is a fairly simple, straightforward CPQ session. Notice you have input boxes that can receive numeric values, which makes sense, you know, for heights and widths and lengths and things like that. Then a lot of drop downs you'll see, you know, those are kind of like discrete domains where you have specific predefined values you can choose from. But CPQ can also display text boxes that receive text, radio buttons, very popular for the allowable options for a particular configuration option, the allowable responses. You can have like little samples like you saw on that table. We'll see another one here for colors. And there's other ways to present the items in the CPQ configuration questionnaire as well. So it's very flexible, the type of interface that you get with CPQ. So here's an example of color selection. You click on the color and it records your response. It knows what color you want. Okay, you get to view images if you set the images up. So if you have images of your products, you can upload those to CPQ or load those to CPQ if it's on premise. And this image can change dynamically if you want it to, and you're set up that way. For example, this particular bike, you notice I chose the purple paint there from the drop down, and then it changed the frame to that kind of that purplish pink, that kind of fuchsia color. So the images can be dynamic. They can be a lot more dynamic than this, but yeah, you can definitely look at an image as you're going along that kind of shows you how the final product is shaping up as you're going through the CPQ questionnaire. Here is a 2D drawing image, and this is a door. You can see it's slightly arched, and it has all the dimensions, and notice how all the dimensions are automatically broken out. And as you change the dimensions, all of those will recalculate. So if you increase the height, then the corresponding parts in the middle will update. So it's the same, it's now the new height. So obviously it's 82 inches now. If you make that 86 inches, and all the constituent pieces somehow have to compensate for that extra 4 inches. Same with the width. So that's an example of a 2D image that's dynamic and changes with the selections that you make. Here's an exploded 3D image with visual configuration. Now you're getting a little bit into the augmented reality, which is the really cool stuff in CPQ cloud. And so you can go in there and you know, spin your image around, explode the image. This is a transformer, so you have the coils and the shields around the coils, and of course your outside metal shields and all that, your rubber mountings and things like that. So this is visual configuration, so it's 3D imaging. There is a details tab when you're in a CPQ session. What that basically does, it presents you a list of all the elements in the configuration and how they contribute to the total price. So as you're making decisions, as you're checking checkboxes or radio buttons or filling in numbers or text or whatnot, certain decisions that you make affect the ultimate price. And so you can always go to the details tab and you can see exactly where all the components of your price are coming from. You can also look at a summary, and this is basically a kind of a running tab of all the decisions that you've made, all your responses to the various CPQ questionnaire questions that you've encountered so far, and exactly what you said. So you can always go here and go back and see how you answered, especially for very complex configurations. This is very handy. And the final price is available in the lower right. And again, you can go to the detail to see how it figured out that that configured price. All right, how do you complete the configuration? So there's 3 buttons in the lower left. You have finish, cancel, and save. So start with save. Save means, okay, what I've done so far in this configuration, I want to save for really large configurations, maybe like a vehicle or something, or maybe a ship or something like that, or a building, something like that. You might only take tackle parts of a configuration at one time, and then you need to go back. You need to present, the running total, the price up till that point, and then you're going to come back and finish it later. So that's a very handy, especially for very complex, very involved configurations. Cancel means, no, I don't really want this after all. The customer just canceled the order, or something like that. So I really don't need this. I'll come back in and do another configuration later. And finish, of course, means you finished, you're done with the configuration, you accept the price the way it's being displayed. As far as you know, everything's correct. You've looked at the summary to double check things. You click finish, and that's important to distinguish finish from save, because finish does push data to XA, assuming you're using XA to integrate with CPQ. So that's very important. Finish will actually do a push of data to XA. Whoop, excuse me here. Fat finger on the mouse key. Okay, so just stressing here that you have those 3 buttons, and just to choose wisely, especially between finish and save, because if you want to go back into the configuration, make sure you click save. So just choose wisely there. This, of course, is Stephen R. Covey, and he said we are free to choose our actions, but we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions. So a little nugget of wisdom thrown in here for free. All right, any questions on that? That was a kind of a real brief introduction, if you'd never seen CPQ before, to what a CPQ configuration session looks like. Do we have any questions, Sherry?
I am not seeing any additional questions at this time.
Okay, let's talk about 2D and 3D drawing capabilities. All right, so you have visual configuration with CPQ, and this is pretty neat. These visual configuration, these built-in capabilities, their whole purpose, their whole aim is really to bring both the product options, the individual options, and the final product configurations to life, to make it really look solid, to make it real. So the different components that can go into the final item, you can have pictures for those. You may remember that table. We had samples of the different colors you could use for the finish for the table. And then, of course, you can have an image which is showing you how your final product, what it looks like up to that point. And we saw an example of that with the bike, and also with the door. So you have the 2D parametric drawing generation. That door was a good example of that. There's 3D CAD assemblies and shop drawings creation. So yeah, there is some integration with CAD drawing products. The 3D interactive model creation was what you saw with that transformer, although that had a bit of AR, or augmented reality, built into it as well. All right, so here's the dynamic 2D parametric drawings. Here's those doors, a little zoomed in, a little more detail visible. Hopefully you can see all the numbers. So yeah, if you want to sit there, the door is originally 76 inches high, and you add up all the numbers on the side. For the vertical dimensions, it should add up exactly to 76. What I did, though, in CPQ is I said, no, I want the door to be a little wider and a little taller. And sure enough, it adjusted everything. Everything adds up again. So it's pretty neat. The drawing is adjusting itself as you're going through the configuration. Even this little arc or array, or whatever you call this, from like the imaginary center of the circle to the circumference. So it's doing some pretty involved math there, some pi r squared or something. Sherry's our resident math expert, but it's doing some pretty amazing math there. Okay, the 3D CAD assemblies and the shop drawings. This produces, the type of engineering drawings that you'd expect, that you're used to. And then also, of course, you can render kind of a quote unquote real life image of what the product should look like. So that's the CAD assemblies and shop drawings. Whoops, excuse me. And then here's your 3D interactive model creation. And you can see how each of these example, one's like a computer workspace, and you're designing like where you're going to have the different shelves, and are they going to be closed in or open? And you can move these around and expand the sizes or shrink them in. Of course, it's all based on your rules. So they got that middle bar here. So the shelves look like they all have to terminate on that middle bar. They can't just be bolted to nothing, to air. So you have some limitations to what you can do, but within those limitations, you can configure and move around and all that. And the same here with this is a shed, an outdoor shed. So this person was deciding whether or not to add a second window for their pet, a lower window, not just for the humans, but for a dog in particular, so the dog would be able to look outside. And then, of course, you could configure the roofing material and whether or not these aluminum shims on the edges would be included, of course, the shape and size of the door and all that kind of stuff. And here's a real good example of augmented reality. And the thing about augmented reality is the various parts of the image are smart. So for example, it knows like the area I'm kind of encompassing with my mouse is the seat, and there's various colors, fabrics that are allowed for the seat, various colors and fabrics that are allowed for the mesh. And then of course the headrest has its colors and fabrics too. And that may not sound too impressive, but remember the transformer, you can spin these things around. If you allow it to, you can have an exploded view, so you can see some of the hardware inside the chair that allows it to rotate and to move up and down, adjustable, all that kind of stuff. You can make it go upside down and all these kind of things. So, and it keeps track of where those zones are that you're allowed to update. So that is augmented reality, and that's part of that's probably one of the neatest things and most recent additions to the CPQ cloud. The on-premise has the 2D drawings. The cloud is where you'd find all the 3D drawing capabilities. Any questions on any of that?
Hey, Charles, I just
Yes.
wanted, we are getting some questions
Okay.
through the chat. I've been trying to answer them as we go.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much.
And I just wanted, I'm pretty sure, like 99% sure on this one, but I want to just bounce it off you. SolidWorks and AutoCAD both have standard integrations into CPQ. Is that correct?
Yes, that's on an upcoming slide, actually. It probably would have been good to have it back there, but yes, yes, it does. Yeah, thank you for whoever asked that, because that's a good lead into the next session.
Okay.
Next section, yeah. Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, great. Let's take a kind of little more detailed view into cloud-based CPQ. And again, what's available now and has been available for a long time now, ever since Infor bought TDCI. They're the ones that made the by design configurator, which is now CPQ. The on-premise has always been an option. You install CPQ, you have an SQL database on an on-prem SQL server, you have CPQ on its server, and probably a test server, live server. But now we're talking about the cloud-based CPQ, which along with other Infor products is now, you have the option to run it in the cloud, not just on-premise. Okay, this is definitely the latest version of CPQ, the cloud-based. It's one of Infor's many cloud offerings. You have Infor CRM, and of course Ion and Infor OS can be in the cloud these days, and all other kinds of cloud suite industrial, the old Sightline in ERP, can be in the cloud. So there's a lot of Infor cloud offerings. And this is probably that second bullet is probably, if you're considering CPQ or if you're currently using CPQ, this is something to consider. The cloud version is where all the new CPQ development work is focused. If you go out to the CPQ, Infor CPQ communities that you can get to from Infor Conciergerie, they actually, back on January 27th, one of the CPQ management team, Randy Kubaki, he presented a roadmap for the next 4 years. So it's pretty great to see the things they're considering enhancing and adding to CPQ. CPQ does integrate with multiple ERP software packages. I mentioned Cloud Suite Industrial as an example of that. LN, the old bond, is another good example of that. Integration with XA is coming, and I put in parentheses, hopefully soon. I know this is important, both the CPQ management and XA management. Obviously, I'm not privy to much more than that, but I know it is important, and we are hoping that we will hear the announcement. Obviously, if you want more details, try to attend one of Ross Freeman's roadmap presentations just as soon as you can, and I'm sure it will be mentioned in some way, shape, or form, or you can always ask about it, of course. Another thing about Cloud CPQ is it's now a suite, like Microsoft Office, considered, obviously not that many components, but there's still a good number of components. My goodness, I gotta lay off the mouse key. Okay, here we go. So the nomenclature does change a little bit when you're talking about cloud-based CPQ. So the configurator itself becomes EC, Enterprise Configurator. So when you're in the configurator in Cloud CPQ, you're really supposed to call it EC or Enterprise Configurator. There's also Enterprise Quoting, which is a web-based cloud-hosted quote order entry portal. It's analogous to the sales portal, or of course, XA's for decades has had the web portal ComNet, which, and of course, now you have ComNet too. So that's what EQ is. That's part of the CPQ suite. So CPQ is now the name for that whole connected suite of applications. It's no longer just the configurator itself when you're talking in the cloud. Now, this nomenclature applies specifically to CPQ cloud. Excuse me. Okay, so which Infor applications are included? If you have a cloud hosted instance of Infor CPQ, and these are the 18 that are included. This screenshot comes right from ISE's cloud hosted CPQ tenant. You know, we're paying for it just like you would if you went this way. And these are the applications Infor includes. It's pretty nice to see Ion Desk comes along, and Mingle. So that nice Infor OS interface, and Ion Desk, of course, workflows, alerts, data flows, event management, things like that. The home pages is really nice as well. Of course, Burst is a tool for developing what's the word I'm looking for? Dashboards. So information dashboard, very, very powerful tool. And then, of course, you can see you have CPQs has several components. The actual configure price quote, which is really EC. Technically, if we're going to be consistent, there is a CPQ analytics, which is a dashboard just for EC or CPQ. Then there's that enterprise quoting I was telling you about. And then a lot of these others are development tools like Mongoose in particular. All right, so those all come a lot. If you have a cloud hosted version of CPQ, those all come along with CPQ. Okay, what are the advantages of Infor OS being integrated with CPQ, the cloud hosted? See, what difference does that make? Well, first of all, those home pages, you get highly customizable landing sites that you can then standardize for users and groups of users. You have the Infor document management tool, which provides very seamless integration to documents. So if you need a picture of one of your end items for a CPQ rule set that you're setting up, it's right there. So it's great. You can add it right in. You can also add those images into your product catalog and EQ. EC configurations are automatically sent to the Infor data lake. So all that data is automatically being saved and stored in the data lake. And then, of course, you can use the various tools to develop dashboards over that data. CPQ analytics is that information dashboard that has a very powerful data modeler. It's pretty neat seeing how that works. You have standard integration with Infor Rhythm, which is a e-commerce, a B2B, B2C, business to business, business to customer application. It integrates with Infor, Salesforce, and Microsoft Dynamics CRM products. All three of those CRM products Infor OS integrates with. And then here's the answer for the drawings. It does integrate with SolidWorks, Autodesk, and Creo CAD. You'd have to probably see a demo to see to what extent each of those integrates, but I know the basics are there, and they're pretty solid, if you excuse the pun, with SolidWorks. So there's some pretty good integration there. So if you want to see exactly to what extent, you could either go to one of the websites. There's videos out there, or see a demo. But there is that integration, and from what I've seen, it's very solid on all three of those. Okay, and then Infor OS is prepared with the proprietary Infor Coleman, which is AI, artificial intelligence, and also Burst for very, very robust information dashboard development. Okay, and this is a slide, Sherry, that I just added last night because I finally figured out how to do it. So this is actually, I'm running CPQ, or really EC, from EQ, from our cloud-based instance on my cell phone. So I was doing a quote for a customer. Obviously this is a test instance, but I actually ran through the configuration right on my cell phone. So the Infor OS integration in the cloud allows you to do that. So it's all through what's called the Infor Go application. That's out on the Apple App Store, and of course the Samsung Galaxy, that app store as well. So you can access it through Infor Go, and then you can generate configurations anytime and anywhere that the internet's available to you. So there's 3. I looked at the information link for that door. I read about all the different types of wood, their strengths, or the pros and cons of each type, trying to decide what type of wood to build my door out of. So that was helpful. And then of course I went through some of the configuration options, and then at the end I checked my summary and finally clicked on the finish button, and sure enough it added that line item to my quote. So that was pretty neat, being able to do that on a mobile device. That's through Infor Go, and that's definitely in the cloud only at this point. All right, so what about CPQ Design Studio for those of you that are familiar with CPQ, especially if you're rule set writers? It's still available on the desktop, and that's where I have to access it. But I do notice that it communicates in real time with our cloud instance of CPQ. So that's pretty neat. And I see every once in a while where it's pushing the data to the cloud. So that's still there. And yeah, if you look at that roadmap, they do want to get Design Studio fully in the cloud and no longer on the desktop. So that's how that, but for the time being, Design Studio is on the desktop, but it is communicating in real time with CPQ in the cloud. What about the configurator simulators? For those of you that use this very powerful testing and diagnostic and troubleshooting tool, that is in the cloud. It's available in the app called CPQ Workbench in your cloud instance of CPQ. So it's really easy to get there and to run. It looks, as you can see from the screenshot, exactly like the desktop version. So there's no learning curve, and it has all the same powerful troubleshooting and testing and tracing capabilities that you're familiar with for the CPQ configurator simulator. Okay, so that was a brief tour of cloud CPQ. And of course, that contrasts with the on-premise CPQ that's been around a long time. Are there any questions on cloud CPQ, Sherry?
I am not seeing any questions at this time.
Okay. All right, so we kind of left our CPQ configuration session in limbo. If you remember, we were talking about the cancel, the save, and the finish button. And so what happens though when you click the finish button? So now let's talk about that. So let's complete the entire integration. So you launched CPQ from XA. You may remember you needed that special little icon on either a template or a card. CPQ was launched. You ran through your configuration options. You specified everything. You saw the base price that CPQ calculated. You could see all the components that made up that base price. You could look at the summary of your options. You could have an image, provided you have the capability to do that, either 2D, 3D. But what happens when you click that finish button? Because obviously we need to get that data into our ERP, which for all of us, of course, is XA. All right, so remember that CPQ or XA, I had that slide, XA knows how to invoke CPQ, but CPQ, conversely, knows how to invoke XA. So it's great two-way communications. They have a happy marriage because they have such good communication and they're open and honest with each other. So that's great. So CPQ in the Enterprise Manager tool, you set up the data that will talk to a specific XA environment. So obviously you need to know your IBM host machine name and you have a port number and things like that, the library and et cetera, obviously a user ID and password. And so all that gets set up, and then CPQ is then able to pass configuration data to the IBM machine once you've clicked the finish button. There is a piece in the middle that often gets overlooked, the CPQ System I Toolkit. And this is a key link between CPQ and XA, because when you click the finish button, technically CPQ pushes the data into the System I Toolkit database tables. So they're out on your IBM System I host machine. You can define which library they reside in. That was on that previous screen. And that's how your configuration data for each configuration then ends up on your IBM machine. So this is something you install, of course, up front. And this is standard across all IBM Power I machine ERPs. The first IBM I-based ERP package that integrated with CPQ, to my knowledge, is one that a lot of us haven't heard of. I only heard of it through the CPQ world, is MacPack, M-A-C-P-A-C, MacPack. So it has this same System I toolkit, and I'm sure like the others like LX and System 21, when their integrations to CPQ are developed, they'll use the System I toolkit as well. So it's a great place for, it's a point-to-point integration that CPQ knows all about. Okay, so remember we were at our line item template. Of course, it could have been a card if you were updating a line item. And so notice the configuration ID. Remember before it was blank and I clicked on that icon to launch CPQ. Now that you've clicked the finish button, now you have a non-blank configuration ID. That's how you know that CPQ and the IBM machine have talked, they've passed information on, and XA is aware that there is a configuration sitting in those interface tables that needs to be processed. So CPQ and EPDM need to work together to fully build your brand new or update, if you already have one, configured item process. So most of the time, of course, you're getting a brand new configured item process just because there's so many permutations and combinations, but occasionally you are configuring the same configuration that you've done in the past, and CPQ and XA recognize that. Did I just go? Yeah, okay. So what happens is your customer order quote line item, initially, if you see this on the bottom, is red. We provide this presentation scheme to our XA CPQ customers. That way, you know right away it's red. It means the configuration in the background is still running. It has not completed. So is it a configured line item? Yes or no. There's that temporary config ID starting with SKU. And then your item process token, in this case, is actually blank. If for those of you familiar with EBCDIC hexadecimal, 40 is blank. All right, so that's really saying that the item process is all blanks. Okay, but then hopefully not too long after that, you see this. And then the presentation scheme is now green, and you still have the configured line item, but it now has a valid config ID, which is a sequential numeric value. It doesn't have that SKU number anymore. And then your item process token will show values besides 40, 40, 40, etc. So you can see exactly what's in your item process token. And that means that XA EPDM has successfully built an item process record for that configuration. And of course, your item process marries together a bill of material and a routing. So once you see this, you're good to go. That means CPQ and XA EPDM have finished their processing. There are two unattached jobs that are involved. You have the configurator processor. If you've ever seen that unattached job, you're wondering what it does. That's the one that wakes up when new records are written to those interface tables in the System I toolkit. And then that UJob works with the EPDM processor UJob to build your new item process with the associated bill of material and the routing. So what's the endpoint of the CPQ to XA to the vanilla out of the box integration? So the end result of the CPQ to XA integration is an EPDM item process. Okay, so you have the item process records. There's actually a family of them, just like the item revisions, a family of records. So you have the definition of an item process. It has a valid configuration ID. It's joining together a bill of material and a routing for that configuration. The alternate bill of material ID will be the configuration ID, and then the routing ID will be a non-blank sequential value that XA provides. Those are all uppercase letters, so it'll be like AAA, CDF, something like that. And the next one will be AAA, CDG, et cetera, it just goes like that. But that way you can tell that, you know, it's an XA generated routing. And then the BOM, of course, is linked to the config ID because they're the same value. Okay, so the endpoint is an item process, and note my kind of shocked, startled smiley there in the title bar of this slide. And then my good friend Will here is saying therein lies the rub. So taking a course from Hamlet, although strictly speaking in the play, Hamlet says, there's the rub, but somehow that became translated in modern times. Therein lies the rub. A lot of customers do not want the endpoint to be an item process. They actually want a unique item for every unique configuration, and that is a good lead into our next section. Do we have any further questions, Sherry?
No further questions at this time, although
Oh.
Shauna is on the edge of her seat, ready to see this next section.
Oh, okay, great. Well, hopefully we don't disappoint. All right, so we have the ISE UIG application, and this extends the CPQ-and-XA, the vanilla out-of-box integration. Oh my goodness, I gotta lay off the mouse key. Okay, what is the UIG? So UIG means unique item generation. It's a custom application developed and supported by ISE, and it's there to, its original intent was to complete the CPQ to XA integration. And by complete, we means it allows a unique item revision to be created for each unique configuration. So you don't, in other words, you don't stop at the item process. You actually generate unique item revisions. But it also extends the CPQ to XA integration, because we made the happy discovery when we were developing this. We discovered the System I toolkit files. We're like, hey, CPQ can pass a lot more information to that interface than just the bare bones that it passes. It does like a configured description, of course, the configured item number, the config ID, the manufacturing variant, the configured price, and the configured cost. And besides the BOM and routing definitions, that's really what you get. And that's great, that's robust, that's sufficient to build an item process. But what about an item revision? Because the item revision, you have all those other attributes that you don't associate with a process. Probably the most important one being a unit weight, very, very important for freight calculations. So CPQ, when it's building a configuration, it can be keeping track of the weights of the components and all that, and the quantity pairs and standard batch quantities and all that, and it can actually send XA what the unit weight should be. So you can extend the CPQ to XA integration. You can have all kinds of stuff. You can create outside operation detail records in the routing and on the fly, and there's all kinds of stuff we've done with that in the past. Line item comments on the CO line item, quote line item, item comments, and XA com, all that kind of stuff. And it also standardizes the integration in that the UIG has setup tables that when you're creating a new item revision or a new item warehouse, it's like, well, what do you want the order policy code to be all the time, or by warehouse or by site? What do you want, the bill of lading commodity code to be, things like that. You can standardize how these new records get created. I call this the five-fold federation, or F3 or F cubed for short. So you start over here on the orange. On the left, you have your XA GUI, which, PowerLink or NetLink, or of course you could have a web portal, on-premise sales portal, cloud, EQ, enterprise quoting, or of course you could be using ComNet too. So you have some type of graphical user interface, and that launches CPQ. You go into the CPQ configurator, you specify all your choices for the configuration options. Then remember, if you press the finish button, then the CPQ interface tables on your IBM host machine get populated. That wakes up those two, the configurator processor UJob, and between those two UJobs, they build a configured item process, including, of course, the BOM and the routing. But then you have an item process, then our UIG, that's where it kicks in, and it generates a unique item revision and other records like enterprise item, item warehouse, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the requirements for the UIG? Of course, you have the same requirements that you would need for XA to incorporate with CPQ that I presented way back when. And so those all are still valid. You definitely need CSM, EPDM, MM, because MM's there because you're building item warehouse records for each unique item revision. Integrator is required, although enterprise integrator strongly preferred. System link needs to be there, but that should not be a problem because CPQ requires system link. And then those two UJobs actually use system link to build the item process. So that's already a requirement. And then you need to be able to interface to Infor CPQ either on-premise or cloud. Here's an example of what the UIG business objects look like. Now, if you're not familiar with what this is, yes, this is XA. This is beyond the scope of this presentation. This is XA running inside of Netlink, running inside of System I Workspace, anywhere, running inside of Infor OS. So the unique item generation, if you can think in a PowerLink, it's a tab. It's actually a sub-tab of the engineering application tab. And then these are all the business objects. So a normal like PowerLink or vanilla Netlink, you would see 16 icons for these 16 business objects. But in this context, Netlink inside of SIWA, inside of Infor OS, you get this nested list from the card. Actually, we've just added a new one for data queues. So 17 and growing on the UIG business objects. You are flexible in how the UIG runs. It can automatically run, and you don't have to kind of think of it through the end order processing. Or if you want to check each CO line item for configurations, make sure it really completed properly, then a user action, you can click a little icon to run the UIG. We provide a lot of flexibility for how the unique item numbers are actually generated. Certain characters can be a prefix or a suffix. Then, of course, at some point, you have to guarantee, my goodness, Sherry. Okay, so at some point you have to guarantee, uniqueness. We do have 2 UIG customers that are supplying the UIG with the unique item number from CPQ. So in that case, we just passively receive the item number that they're providing. Because CPQ does know best. I mean, it's the one that has all the configuration data. It knows best whether you've hit a brand new unique configuration or you're reusing an existing configuration. So they wanted to have control over the item numbers. But if you don't want CPQ to do that, this is pretty flexible, this setup here. We have detailed logging every single line item that where you replace the item process, configured item process with a unique item revision gets logged. And of course, all the subtasks like creating an enterprise item, like creating the item revision, creating the item warehouse, et cetera, all that gets logged as well. So like I said, to run the UIG, if you want to run it for an entire customer order, you do have to wait for the processing, the CPQ and EPDM processing to finish. All the configured line items have to appear green. And once they do, you can click on this icon. If one of them's not green yet, then you will get an error message saying, hey, one of the line items is still being processed. But provided they're all green and everything, then the UIG will run and all those item processes will be replaced with unique item revisions. And there's, for example, the little pop-up. In this context, subset means all records means all line items for a particular customer order, a particular quote. Is not every single line item. So that's important to understand. Okay, did that generate any questions, Sherry?
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this time, but let's pause to see if anyone has any additional questions